Here's why Alicent betrayed her father Otto by pleading mercy for Rhaenyra. The world of Westeros is built on loyalty, ambition, and the fragile bonds of family. Yet within the Targaryen civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons, these bonds were tested to their breaking point. Alliances shifted, loyalties were questioned, and betrayals came from the most unexpected corners. One of the most striking instances of this tangled web of trust and betrayal involves Alicent Hightower, the daughter of Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, pleading mercy for Rhaenyra Targaryen. In doing so, she directly challenged her father's ambitions, his authority, and the rigid strategies he had so carefully constructed. Today, we explore why Alicent's choice was a betrayal in the eyes of Otto and how it shaped the deadly course of the Targaryen civil war. To fully grasp the depth of Alicent's actions, we must first understand her father, Otto Hightower. Otto was a man of unyielding ambition, intellect, and influence. As the Hand of the King, he wielded enormous power, shaping policies, advising kings, and manipulating the political landscape to secure the future of the Hightower family and their interests within the realm. Otto was calculating, strategic, and utterly dedicated to the ascendance of the Greens, the faction loyal to his granddaughter, Aegon II Targaryen, and by extension, his family's long-term influence. For Otto, Rhaenyra represented not just a rival claimant to the Iron Throne but a direct threat to everything he had worked to achieve. Alicent Hightower, Otto's daughter, grew up immersed in this environment of calculated politics, sharp ambition, and familial duty. From a young age, she was tutored in the intricacies of court life, the delicate art of diplomacy, and the necessity of loyalty to one's family. She was raised to understand that the survival and advancement of her house depended on her obedience, her intelligence, and her strategic alliances. In many ways, Alicent was the embodiment of her father's teachings, yet she would ultimately make a choice that defied Otto's expectations and reshaped the trajectory of the Targaryen civil war. The event that would define this betrayal occurred at a critical juncture in the Dance of the Dragons. Rhaenyra, facing immense pressure from the Greens and their allies, found herself cornered by forces aligned against her. The realm was a powder keg of political tension, with factions vying for influence, soldiers readying for battle, and noble houses choosing sides with deadly consequences. In this context, Rhaenyra's life and claim to the throne hung in the balance. Otto, ever the strategist, saw only one path: the total subjugation or elimination of his enemies, including Rhaenyra herself. Yet in this moment of political ruthlessness, Alicent made a choice that would horrify her father. She pleaded for mercy for Rhaenyra, urging restraint and temperance in a situation where her father demanded no compromise. To Otto, this was nothing short of betrayal. Alicent had not merely acted against a political strategy, she had defied his authority, challenged his vision for the Greens, and risked undoing years of careful planning. Her plea represented a fracture in the Hightower family's unified front and a potential vulnerability that Otto could scarcely afford. Understanding Alicent's motives requires an examination of her character, her upbringing, and the complex pressures she faced. Alicent was not a simple pawn. She was intelligent, perceptive, and deeply aware of the moral and emotional dimensions of the political game. While Otto's strategies were cold and calculating, Alicent possessed a sense of empathy and humanity that complicated her decisions. She recognized the consequences of unchecked brutality and saw the humanity in Rhaenyra, a woman who, despite being a rival, was still human, a mother, and a member of a family Alicent had connections with through marriage and political alliance. Her plea for mercy was therefore driven by a combination of personal morality, political calculation, and perhaps an awareness of the long-term consequences of cruelty. Alicent understood that the cycle of vengeance and bloodshed could destabilize the realm, provoke rebellion, and undermine the legitimacy of Aegon II's rule. In advocating for mercy, she was acting not only as a daughter and a political figure but as someone with foresight, recognizing that unchecked ambition and brutality could have ramifications far beyond the immediate moment. Yet despite her intentions, Otto viewed this as a betrayal. From his perspective, Alicent had undermined the strategy he had meticulously crafted. He had spent years consolidating power, aligning noble houses, and preparing for a decisive victory over the Blacks, Rhaenyra's faction. Any act that introduced hesitation, mercy, or compromise threatened the delicate balance he had established. Alicent's moral stance, though noble in intent, was a direct challenge to his authority and a deviation from the rigid expectations he held for his family. The sense of betrayal is further amplified when we consider the personal and familial dynamics at play. Alicent was Otto's daughter, raised to obey, to strategize alongside him, and to advance the interests of their house. Her actions were therefore not just a political divergence, they were a rupture in the paternal bond, a challenge to the hierarchy within the Hightower family, and a rejection of the principles Otto had instilled in her. For Otto, this was deeply personal. The betrayal cut to the heart of his expectations as a father and a strategist, creating a rift that would have both immediate and lasting consequences for their family and for the Greens. Rhaenyra's perspective, however, casts Alicent's actions in a different light. To Rhaenyra, Alicent's plea for mercy was a lifeline, a reminder that even in a world consumed by ambition and conflict, there remained glimmers of humanity and compassion. It was a moment that underscored the complexity of the dance of the dragons, revealing that alliances and enmities were rarely absolute. Rhaenyra may have still viewed Alicent as an adversary politically, but the intervention demonstrated that personal choice and moral reasoning could transcend factional loyalty. The dynamics of this betrayal also highlight the tension between personal conscience and familial duty. Alicent was caught between the expectations of her father, the demands of political strategy, and her own sense of right and wrong. Her decision to plead mercy illustrates the difficulty of navigating this intersection, a moment where loyalty to family and house conflicted with ethical imperatives. It is a reminder that in the brutal world of Westerosi politics, moral courage can be as significant a force as military strength or strategic genius. Otto's response to this perceived betrayal was predictably severe. He recognized that any display of leniency could be interpreted as weakness, both by his enemies and by his allies. In his eyes, Alicent's actions risked destabilizing the Greens, undermining the authority of the crown, and threatening the long-term ambitions of the Hightower family. This tension between father and daughter underscores the high stakes of loyalty and obedience in Westeros, where even a single deviation from strategy could alter the course of civil war. It is important to note that Alicent's plea was not without political calculation. She may have recognized that excessive cruelty toward Rhaenyra could galvanize opposition, provoke rebellion, or alienate neutral noble houses. By advocating mercy, Alicent was potentially acting in the long-term interest of her faction, seeking to balance immediate tactical advantage with broader political stability. Yet in doing so, she directly defied her father, illustrating the complicated interplay of morality, strategy, and familial loyalty that defined the Targaryen civil war. This incident also illuminates the human cost of political ambition. Otto's relentless drive to secure power came at the expense of personal relationships, trust, and familial harmony. Alicent's act of conscience was a reminder that even the most calculated strategies must contend with human emotion and moral judgment. In pleading for mercy, she was asserting her agency, demonstrating that obedience and loyalty are never simple, and that moral courage can disrupt even the most rigid plans. The betrayal had immediate repercussions for the Hightower family's internal dynamics. Otto was forced to confront the reality that his daughter, though loyal in many respects, possessed her own judgment, priorities, and moral framework. This challenged his authority, forced him to reconsider the execution of his strategies, and added a layer of unpredictability to the Greens' faction. In a war defined